Everybody in the chat ready to go? I'm going to take the silence as a yes. Woo! Yes.
All right, so we're here, guys. We're here at our final session for Virtual Design School, and we would like to thank you for coming on this journey with us. Before we get started, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Dakota Nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And today, as usual, next slide please, Josh, we would like you to join the conversation by joining us on Twitter with the hashtag Design School. And, you know, I'm just going to put this out there, but if any of you decide are inspired and feel like building your prototypes and showing them to us after this session, we would love it. We would love to see them. We would love to see what happens with them. Do put it on Twitter for us.
So there were some that were put on Twitter, and there were some prototypes that we loved, and there were some plans for prototypes that we just thought were fantastic. And we want to highlight a couple today before we get into our main speaker. So we got a plan for this one, and it's kind of, you know, a little basic. They want to prototype a form, but they're jumping. They're saying like, okay, I want to make sure that it's easy and clear and simple to use. And they talked about incorporating colors and screenshots, things that they could make the form, you know, just easier for the user to, oh my goodness, user to use. Can you tell it's the last session? And just kind of saying like, we're going to share this and create it with the immediate design team. But I like the piece of, we're just going to take a look at everything that's kind of built and steal ruthlessly and kind of create one thing that kind of links back and forth. Such a good idea. Like we said, design isn't coming up with something completely brand new. It's borrowing from other things that are out there. And of course, I have to talk about this one. If anyone
Post-it note bandit.
Post-it note bandit was at it again. And this is a really, you know, they talked about VR in their idea, and then they went into the prototyping stage, and they quickly, it seems like, okay, VR coding, it's not practical, it's not going to be to the point enough. So how can we borrow from that idea to create something that we could share? And they immediately went to one of my, as a 90s kid, this is my favorite thing, choose your own adventure.
Yes.
I thought that was such a cool idea. And, you know, going through it and like, you know, what questions did they ask? And then I seen this posted up on Twitter. And, you know, I'm a little bit speechless as I share this with you guys. It's really a great way. Like, this is prototyping to a T. This looks like it's a PowerPoint, you know, quick pictures that were borrowed off the internet. And then they've got the narrative, like, okay, you know, this is like, you know, the phone call. Let me put you through to a coordinator. Turn to page 11. I always remember these books because I would turn to page 11, see if I made the right choice, and then quickly go back so it didn't lose my space. But just a great way to kind of highlight prototyping and how it is just this quick iteration, just trying something out.
And what I love about this is that you can really hand it over to somebody. You can show them your idea. And while with the first example, we saw some great instincts and great ideas, we couldn't see what they wanted to show us. We couldn't really experience it. So that's why I think this one is just fantastic. But we are going to hear from our special guest, Alika Lafontaine. We had the privilege of hearing Alika speak at the last Quality Summit in Calgary, and he floored us all. And we are very pleased that he's here with us today to share with us why storytelling is so important for our health system and why it's so important for design thinking. So welcome, Alika. Thank you for coming today.
All right, thank you for having me.
So Josh is just... Yeah, he's just going to share, transfer over to you, and we'll get started.
Sure. All right. And everyone can see that there?
Yeah, it's working well.
You betcha.
Okay, perfect. So I was thinking, since Aaron asked me to talk, what would probably have the most impact for everybody on the line here. And the thought came to expand on a topic that I introduced within the Quality Summit, but didn't go into as much detail, called moments and momentum. So I'll tell a little bit about myself. I'm a Oji Cree Métis Pacific Islander, so I have a lot of different Indigenous backgrounds. I've been co-designing and leading health transformation initiatives for about 2 decades now, both within and outside of Indigenous health. When I was a trainee, I was part of the Saskatchewan Surgical Transformation Initiative, which really was a big design project on how we rebuild our surgical pathways within Saskatchewan. I was co-lead for measurement and um, implementation within the patient care strategy for here in Alberta. And then recently I was part of something called the Indigenous Health Alliance, which brought together about 30% of all First Nations across Canada to bring in health transformation into federal health systems. And a lot of our work got integrated into the new way that the federal government rebuilt its programming and what it was actually trying to accomplish through these different initiatives. So I've had the opportunity to both learn and lead within the health system at local, provincial, and national levels. And I've also had the chance to serve on a lot of different boards from a lot of different perspectives. Health administrators within Healthcare Can, which took the place of the National Hospital Association, the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. I sit on a couple of their regulatory and accreditation committees, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, the Alberta Medical Association, Canadian Medical Association, Indigenous Physicians Association, along with a few others. So what I've learned over the last 20 years is that applying a mix of system thinking, design thinking, and a unique type of thinking that we created in our lab that we call alignment thinking is really good for solving complex, intractable, multi-stakeholder problems, which to me really explains the majority of things that you're probably going to run into when it comes to the health interventions that you're going to try and have impacted. So just a quick review of what I mean by all these different types of thinking, so you can frame the discussion before we get into it. So the first is that system thinking really asks the question of how can we eliminate redundancy, mistakes, and inefficiency. So for those who've been involved in transformations that have things like Lean or Six Sigma, this is really the type of approach that people are taking, is they're asking how do we eliminate within our workflow things that don't need to be there or make them work faster. Design thinking, on the other hand, really focuses on a human-centered outcome and asks the question, does our service actually focus on the person's using it? And so you've had the opportunity to participate in a lot of the steps within design thinking, which really asks a very different question than what Lean would ask, which is, are we actually doing the right thing, or are we doing it as fast and at as high volume as possible? Alignment thinking is kind of a mix of the two. It focuses a lot on stratified priorities and how those priorities differ between different stakeholders. For example, if you have a physician and an administrator who are sitting there after hours deciding whether or not to proceed with the surgery, a physician wants to do the surgery. I mean, hammers look at nails and want to pound them, right? Administrators, on the other hand, are going to sit there and wonder, what about costs, after hours, reimbursement for nurses? Is this the safest way for us to go about doing things? Do we have beds, et cetera, et cetera? So everyone has different priorities. They all look at the patient in a different way. And what alignment thinking really looks at those different types of perspectives. We published on this type of thinking, and this is just a brief slide. I'll share the presentation with everyone after, but if you want to read more about it, you can. So when you look at design thinking, this is what you go through. You have a design thinking process. You generate some brilliant product or process. And then you get into the implementation part, and you probably have a few people saying, yeah, I don't really think I want to go do this. All right. So how do you overcome that? And that's the focus of the presentation today. So I'm going to introduce an idea that I shared with everybody over at the QI conference. So if you've seen this before, I'll just show it to you one again. And that's this concept called Scotoma. So we learn about this in medical school. It's a partial loss of vision or a blind spot in an otherwise normal visual field. That can happen for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you're born with it. Maybe you get hurt and then you lose that part of your visual field. Maybe you have some progressive disease that ends up affecting your nerves, your muscles. But for whatever reason, you can't see what's actually out there. And so I'm going to have a quick exercise with everybody just to count the Fs. It's going to be a little bit different because we're not here live, but I'll describe what usually happens within these presentations. So just take a few seconds and read through this paragraph. I want you to focus on the Fs, and I'm going to give you 3 seconds, 1, 2, and 3. So how many were there? When you look at audiences and when I ask this polling question, usually about half of the people say that there were 3 Fs. And you can throw up into the chat whether or not you saw, 3 Fs, 4 Fs, or what have you. So I'm going to show you the paragraph again, and I want you to just be honest with yourself about what you actually saw. So there's actually 6 Fs, all right? Finished files of scientific of. All right, so the big question that people have, well, and I see lots of people had 3 and 4s. One person felt pretty strongly about not counting all of them. There's a lot of different reasons why we don't see the Fs. The first is that when we read, we tend to read aloud in our heads, and so the sounds don't really line up. When we say scientific, it doesn't sound like of. We also read for content. So even though I told you just count the Fs, a lot of you wanted to know what the paragraph is about, and so you probably spent a bit of your time scanning for the Fs and then looking back to see what the content was. The third is that when we don't have a lot of time to read, we tend to skim. And so when we skim, we focus on the big words and we avoid the small words because in our minds, we think that these small words are fillers. Now, I'm going to have you do another exercise. I'm going to have you read the triangles, and I'm going to put them up in just a second. So just read them 1, 2, 3. So read the first one, read the second one, and then read the third one. So now I want you to take a second and read again. So how many of you guys missed that? And you don't need to post this up in the chat, but just be, oh, looks like somebody failed.
Yeah, I definitely failed this one.
Yeah. And so I literally just told you what the trick was. I told you why the trick was there. I told you in detail the neurocognitive processes that were involved in it. But for some reason, we still don't see what we don't see. And so scotomas are also intellectual. It's an inability to perceive distortions in perception that are obvious to others. And so going back to that slide where you have that person within the system who's saying, yeah, I don't really think that this is a great idea. For whatever reason, they don't see what you see. And so this could be related to politics, this could be related to other thoughts and beliefs, social interactions, institutional structures, but these are really intellectual blind spots. And so when we talk about creating moments and momentum, the question really is how do we move through these blind spots? So to illustrate that, I'm going to share a quick video.
Yes, I have experienced racism in our system with the doctor here and nurses. Nurses treat us differently. My file, every time I go there, like, I'd be there before everybody, and I thought it's first come, first serve, but my thing would get, my file would get put to the bottom. I'd have to wait there all day, and I'd be trying to talk to one of the nurses, or talk to the doctor. Then they'd tell me, go sit down, like telling me to go sit down like a child. I'm not a child, and then not wanting to speak to me, and then I see someone goes up right after me, like another patient, and they talk to one of them right away, and like they tell me they're busy, and that's with the doctor and nurses that they do that. Well, for one thing, I'd like a different doctor, plain and simple, a different doctor, and also better training for people skills for the nurses. They seem not to have any people skills, They get grouchy at us. The woman that sits at the desk that takes some names and, sets us up, she gets grouchy with us. When I was there 2 weeks ago, I heard her swear and say, effing natives. I heard that. I was sitting right there in that chair. She kind of whispered it, but I heard it. I heard it clear enough to make out effing natives.
Well, I know when my mother was in the hospital, she had diabetes and she had, like I said, heart, kidney, and lung problems, and she was in the hospital for about a month or maybe even 2 months. And when I went to visit her, she didn't have no sheets on her bed. They told me that she was on a mattress that didn't need sheets, but when they finally came to check on her, it was not that kind of mattress. And my mother wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't make any kind of fuss. She just laid on the rubber mattress, and that's it.
I'm a diabetic, and the one you're talking about, he likes touching women. He even done that to me too. And I used to wonder, is that possible for a doctor to do that? Eh? He slipped his two hands into my panties, but didn't touch my private. He done that from the back to the front. Eh? Boy, I was amazed, and he just threw himself on the chair after he got that, and he was just blushing, just red. Eh? I just about swore at him, but then again he might charge me. I should have swore at him at the time. I tell him the same thing what I experienced with him. Are they going to do anything about it? Like that. You know the time I broke my knee? And then when I was there for 5 days, and the nurse was coming to give me fours, and then I told her, can I get a Tylenol extra strength instead of it? She got mad at me, and she went back to the word she keeps her pills to come and give me that Tylenol thing. And she holds my lips and then puts that pill into my mouth roughly. And I told the other nurse to put my leg on that pillow. She lifted my leg, put the pillow there, just dropped my leg. I was just being treated. If I was able to walk, I said I would have walked out of there. And I told my auntie, though, she gets the same treatment.
Well, a lot of old elders don't feel safe there. Like, I see elders when they're in the hospital, like when I go up there from that time, I talk with them. They don't feel safe. They look scared, but they don't want to say anything, but they look scared, and you can feel that on them, and that shouldn't be these are our elders, they shouldn't be feeling scared like that. That's a place they should feel safe.
Kinds of things should happen. We should have proper diagnosis. We should have First Nation people at the doctor's office, the drugstore, throughout the system there. We should have a place for concerns to be heard, anonymity, and also online questionnaires or something to that effect where a person can actually just sign in and say this is what happened to them.
He's the only doctor we can see, so what if we're really sick one time and he doesn't want to give us treatment because of that? And he will do that.
And that nurse there, that receptionist at the hospital, she used to be very friendly with me. Now I'm mad to her, I guess. For what, I don't know. You should see the way she treats them, very negative and looking angry. I just about told her the last time, why don't you quit your job if you don't like working for Indians? I just about said, I will do one of these days.
So that's not an easy video to watch. And when I present this to physicians across the country, I've probably done it about 100 times now. I always include this quote: "Our stories are so out of norm and removed from others' experience that those others have a hard time believing that these things can happen. They believe that these experiences are extremes. This is our status quo. For those of us that live this reality, the status quo is no longer an option for us, our children, and our communities." So a question to people listening, and this is just a rhetorical question, is do you believe these stories? Do those around you, especially those within decision-making positions, believe these stories? And do we share these stories openly? So this brings us back to moments and momentum. That's a curated moment. So from the point of the slide where I start talking about scotomas to the end of the slide where I ask the question, do you believe these stories? It focuses on creating a moment for people who go through that to explore whether or not they actually think that racism exists. And whether you're looking at racism, sexism, classism, differences in access, maldistribution of resources, whether you're touching on big or small things, the way that we book surgical cases, or the way that we receive faxes versus emails, or any of these other things. There's a lot of strong emotion tied to the way that we've always done things. And I think when you're looking at implementing these wonderful design ideas that you have, is you can't underestimate how strong that emotional attachment is and how much it hurts people within systems to be challenged on that. Going back to racism in that moment, the hardest thing for people to reflect on when it comes to racism is that I may be doing racist actions, and does that make me a good or a bad person? And whether you're looking at that or you're taking something that seems not to be emotionally loaded, like surgical order, if a surgeon is told, well, you're not going to do your case next, that cuts straight to the core of surgical physician and their identity around whether or not their patients are priority, promises that they may have made to the families that they were going to get done tonight or sometime during the day, or other things, them seeing that longitudinally their patient has gone through all these issues, but not knowing the longitudinal journey of anybody else who's gone through the same surgical workflow that maybe wasn't their patient, it was from a different specialty. And so when we go through creating change and working with those people who often stand in opposition to anything different than the status quo, we have to make sure that we don't mix moments and momentum. They're two different things. They're both important, but they're two very different things. Momentum enables individuals to scale up and out desired behavior. Moments, on the other hand, enable individuals to rethink their beliefs and their emotional attachments to the status quo. If problems are complex, multi-stakeholder, and historically intractable, if you're picking like a really sticky design problem, your system change always requires you to create these moments first. Systems often get fixated on momentum. Within Alberta Health Services, being involved with different projects, everybody wants to take that pilot project, kind of scale it up across the entire province. But they often ignore the social momentum that you have to build in addition to just the project momentum. It's not just about knowing what to do, it's about knowing why to do it and being emotionally ready for that actual change. So in health systems in general, this is how they say to build momentum. You organize a committee, you create a draft framework based on a bunch of great ideas that you guys had. You push that out in some sort of consultation where you ask people, we thought up these ideas. Do you think they're good or not? You maybe get 14 to 15% actually responding to your surveys. Of the people who you talk to, you never actually talk to them long enough to get them to disagree with you. And then you come back into your committee and you say, okay, we're going to make a draft report based on the feedback that we've gotten. So then you send out this draft report. People who weren't engaged in the original process don't bother to open the attachment. And then you get feedback and everyone thinks, oh, well, no one said anything. And so it must be great. So let's set this into a final report. And then you go out and you spend the next 3 years trying to get people to adopt your recommendations. And for the most part, you don't end up being successful. Like, this is the majority of experiences within system change within health. If you want to compare it to, say, like a venture capital firm, the unicorn is the one that actually gets adopted using this process. So momentum is more effective if organizations are top-down and hierarchical. If you look at where lean worked best, it was within organizations that built like a widget, and then any process that happened within building that widget, somebody in management or who in middle management or executive management could sit there and say, everybody stop, we're going to change things because things aren't safe or efficient or other things. Decisions in those environments can be uniformly enforced. If you have a top-down decision-making structure, if a CEO says something's going to happen, there's direct mechanisms to kind of have a waterfall effect to have people all fall in line. All participants have to share the same belief and behaviors related to the outcomes as well. And that's a big reason why organizations that are private and hierarchical who have really strong corporate cultures tend to be able to deal with system change really well. It's because they integrate people. It's the difference between like Canada, who's a
Alika, sorry to interrupt.
Sure, go ahead.
Some people are having a hard time listening to you. Maybe you can put the mic close to your...
Oh, sure. Is that better there?
Yeah. I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's the difference between Canada as a multicultural society where people kind of come in, and Canadian is kind of the second way that you describe yourself, you know, First Nation Canadian, Filipino Canadian, etc. Or the US where you're an American first and whatever you are second. You know, it's a difference in a corporate culture versus, you know, a non-uniform way of approaching things. Momentum is less effective in environments that are consensus-based, have multiple stakeholders, and especially if those multiple stakeholders don't have direct accountability to each other. All right, so within health, this actually describes exactly what we exist in. So as a physician, if an administrator wants me to do a certain thing, they can't make me do a certain thing unless they go through the medical staff bylaws, right? So if a manager has a problem with a physician, there's a very long, convoluted way of them actually getting any action related to it. In these environments, decisions can't be enforced uniformly, and there's a lot of resources that are required in order to get people to comply with what you want. Participants have a variety of different beliefs and behaviors related to the outcome when momentum is less effective as well. So how do you get corporate cultures ready for change? So instead of the previous slide and those steps, what you're actually trying to create when you're addressing those individuals who don't want to support you is often you have to deal with the lack of hope that they have that things could actually change. And I think you'll be surprised if you ask the question, do you actually believe that this change can happen? How many times you'll be told no. All right, so developing that hope, creating empathy and inclusion, and then starting to look through value exchange, commitment, and then allocating resources is the real way that we go about creating change. But at the end of the day, it's really creating trust. That's what we're literally doing within this process. So when you use moments and momentum together, human-centered outcomes direct stakeholders to a hierarchical accountability, i.e. we're all accountable to the patient. In health, that's the only thing that kind of ties us all together, is the person who's going through the system. Empathy creates a safe emotional space for us to discuss harsh truths. You know, watching that video is really hard to watch, but if you're in an environment where you've created this space where people feel that you're not attacking them as individuals and instead talking about the issue, it's easier to discuss very harsh truths. When you articulate the problem, it helps participants to see the qualitative and quantitative aspects of the issue. You know, those soft and hard things that people often list. And at the end of it, we should never quit listening to stakeholders about our product or process. So sometimes when I give this presentation, there's a misconception that somehow I'm asking people in the design process to either choose momentum or moments. But in reality, within design thinking, you already have these skills that you've developed within the last few weeks. When you empathize, define, and ideate, these are actually curated moments that you're creating. You know, the design process has shown you different ways to unpack ideas, different ways to create safe spaces, ways to make people feel that you're not being judgmental, that you accept what they're sharing, but all within context, valuing things based on the actual outcome that you're trying to achieve. Momentum is part of implementation, and you've learned skills surrounding that. And then with prototyping and testing, this is really where you're creating alignment. So the design process is not any different than what I just explained. It's just that you sometimes have to unpack and unlayer a different perspective when it comes to the tools and skills that you've been building up over the last few weeks. Hope and empathy plus inclusion always equals trust. When you have trust, you have the ability to take risks with someone else. When you choose new ways of doing things, there's always risk. All right, so if you only remember one slide of everything that I shared, remember this one. The status quo is usually the lowest level of risk. So when people do things the same way over and over and over again, it's because they don't think they'll get in trouble, or they won't expose themselves to reputational, operational, resource risk. I mean, you can list many, many different kinds. To get sustained momentum for your ideas, that's always a reflection of sustained trust. So as you go through the design process, and then as you go into taking those prototypes that you work so hard on and trying to implement them within systems, remember that at the end of the day, you're using these design skills and the tools that have been shared with you to really create trust within the social networks that you're going to be placed in. And those people who sit there and say no, the reason why they're saying no is really because of the risk that they're taking on and because they haven't reached a level of trust to overcome that level of risk. And so at the end, I say good luck and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So anybody, if you have any questions, throw them into the chat box. I initially, what I'd like to hear a little bit more about, Alika, is how can you build trust with people that are in other silos, that have different expectations for outcomes and different ideas, and maybe aren't checking their bias. How do you build trust when your team is virtual and you've maybe never met them in person?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'll say is that for some reason you have to see people face to face in order to really create a relationship prior to going into teleconferencing or video conferencing. And so I'd really encourage anyone who has distributed teams, make some time to actually meet in person. In my own experience, you probably only need to have one good meeting, but make sure that it's long enough for you to cut through kind of the coffee chat. If you're talking about the weather, people aren't really in the environment where they can develop trust. What I do in situations where I almost, I curate these environments of trust is if I'm leading a committee, I try and lead the committee to having a really harsh argument with each other as soon as possible. So as soon as people explode on each other, it's like you're giving them permission to actually say what they want to say. And so the risk with that for the person who's managing the meeting is you have to understand how to manage conflict. All right. How do you take the issue and unwind it from the people? So you're talking about the issue versus the individuals involved in the issue. Once you can work your way through that initial conflict, people start to be really honest with each other. And I think if you're someone who is on the side of wanting to develop trust or being part of a committee that they don't really trust yet, until you've seen how people manage like the real you, you have no idea whether or not you should trust them yet. And it is a normal human response. Brene Brown actually has a series of books that are really great with this. She has a framework for developing trust, including things like boundaries and other things. I'd really encourage that if you haven't read Brene Brown or seen her TED Talk, that you take a couple moments just to read through there. A lot of those elements are elements that you can use in conflict management. But if you're looking at the skills needed to develop trust as a leader, it's being able to have that emotional intelligence to know when people are actually upset, because people don't always say that they're actually upset. Having those skills to lead people to the place where they actually share what they really want to share. You know, in racism, I mean, one of the common things I come across, there's always one physician in the room who's like, well, I understand that racism is a problem for everyone else, but it's not a problem for me. And I'm going to list all these reasons why I've never been racist. And that's, they're listing them. You sit there and go, well, actually, you're hitting all the check boxes for everything that we've been talking about. You know, but how do you help that person kind of plug into the discussion without feeling like it's just going to be a pylon? And I do think that it's more difficult to generate environments of trust in our current societal construct, just because people are so polarized, right? Like you link morality with a lot of decisions now. You know, if you don't support climate change, then you're a bad person who hates everyone, right? Do I believe in climate change? Absolutely. But do I think people who don't believe in it are terrible people? Probably not. But even going as far as saying, you know, well, you must be uneducated, like that's also a moral judgment, right?
Alika, we had a question from someone on the line saying, what do you do when agendas are at play and people are not being transparent about them? Do you lean on empathy related work to ground everyone in the experience, or moments that you're talking about?
So the priorities part is where the alignment approach really comes into. So alignment is really about illustrating how priorities don't link to missions. And so The moments part opens up the emotional ability to talk about what's important to you. If you're searching for alignment, it's really identifying how what people want to do doesn't really have anything to do with what we need to do. I'll give you an example. When we were working with the Alliance, we had a big meeting at the beginning where we brought in a lot of university chairs in Indigenous health. And we were going around the room talking about value that they could contribute. And one of the things that came up over and over again is, well, we're going to create a program to train people on cultural safety. And so they were asking for $4 million or more in order to have this, and they wanted us to go fundraise. And we reflected back to them, well, that's not really the mission of what we're trying to achieve. It's like a tool that we can use, but you're really taking value out of the process because you're asking us to raise money for you. And so it was a hard conversation for people to have. I'm not going to try and paint over and say that there wasn't a lot of harsh words that were passed back and forth, and like there's a lot of emotional management that had to happen in that environment. But by the end, when we actually went around and we asked, what value can you provide? Every one of the chairs, and these are like people that I've looked up to my entire career, actually said, I have literally no value that I can provide to this process. So when people have different priorities, it's not that they don't have value, it's just that they don't have value to what you're trying to accomplish. And if they don't, they probably shouldn't be in a decision-making position when it comes to what you're trying to do.
That's so true. That's so true.
I have one more question, last question, sorry. Alika, there was a comment made about around consensus decision-making. And so could you elaborate more on the piece that, so are you against it for it, or is it just recognizing that it is not enough?
Yeah, so it's just a tool, right? So any type of decision making is just a tool. And that's one of the reasons why in my presentations I try and use more effective, less effective. Consensus-based decision making works in a lot of environments. But if you're looking at if you're looking at trying to push through things in a way where momentum is really the reason why you're trying to push things through, consensus-based usually doesn't work that well.
Okay.
So it's not commenting on whether or not it's better or worse. It's just situationally, sometimes things work better or don't work as good. And that slide was strictly just keeping it within the box of, if you're trying to build momentum, consensus-based decision-making structures tend to actually make momentum slow down than it is to speed up. And in some situations, maybe it's a bad idea. Maybe that's a good thing, right? But it depends on context.
Yeah, true. Well, thank you very much. That certainly gives us a lot to chew on. I love the difference between momentum and creating the moment and using that for storytelling to try to get people to understand your perspective and different points of view. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
One thing that we wanted to talk about as well, since this is the last session in our design school, is what happens after you test with your user. What do they think? And so there are really three outcomes that you can have. One is an inefficient failure, and this basically means that you missed the mark completely, people didn't really get it, and but you learned some things, and it saved you from putting extra effort down the long road of launching something that people don't want. Now, we got this when we went into, they were trying to create a new patient kidney dialysis social area. So for people that were new to dialysis, so that they could come together and learn from each other and have some peer support. And we thought it was a fantastic idea. We quickly did a prototype and took it to people who were looking at experiencing dialysis for the first time and entering that part of their lives. And they said, screw that. I don't really want to know about other people's. I want to know how I can do this at home. I want to know about what the implications are for me at home and what the risks are and how I can avoid having to come somewhere to get dialysis all the time. And so we quickly pivoted, and they created a different program for kidney dialysis patients based on that quick feedback for that very short prototype. The second type of success you can have is a flawed success. And this basically means that you're kind of on the right track. You've definitely hit some points. Some people have given you some good feedback, but you're not quite there yet. And this is what we saw with the card game that we mentioned in one of our previous sessions. We tested it with nurses. They tried it out. They liked it, but it was just a little bit confusing in some of the gameplay, and we needed to tweak some of that. So we needed a couple more rounds of testing. And then, of course, there's the epic win. And this is when all your users' needs are met. They can experience the prototype with very little direction, and you're getting the right emotional outcome that you're hoping for. And this just means that you have, to use Alika's word, you have created the moment, and now it's time to jump into the momentum because you're ready to implement this idea. So when you're thinking about the outcomes of your prototypes, there is no absolute failure. The worst it could be is you can learn something quickly and then move on to something that's going to hit the mark a little better. Next slide, please.
Oh, there we go.
So we wanted to also leave you with some of our favorites. We've just listed some free toolkits that we use all the time, some cool websites to check out for inspiration and how-tos. If you are specifically looking to upskill any kind of design skills, do go see Tuts Plus. They are fantastic. It's free. You can learn in lots of different ways there. And then our 3 favorite good reads. Now, these are, I think, the basics for anybody who's going to jump into design thinking. But if you can only read one book, I would read Sprint by Jake Knapp because it does talk quite a bit about the theory of design thinking. It has excellent real world examples so that it goes through all of the different phases and what they mean and what it looks like when it's put into practice. And it gives you a really good solid foundation of where to start from as well. Next slide, please. So now we'd like to talk to you a little bit about our pro tips. So for this slide, we were looking for a fantastic picture that would explain how we feel about pro tips, but came across this one instead. But really what you want to do, if you could take anything from what we've learned over the last 7 weeks, is that you need to question your bias. You always have to ask, is there more than this, my perspective about this problem or about this potential solution? And you do this by being humble about what you know, what you think you know, what you think, and humble about your approach to design thinking, because you always want to approach it like a learner. You never want to approach it like you're giving people, like you're the expert in the situation, but rather that you have so much more to learn. And then finally, romance the pain. So that just talks about being comfort with the discomfort that working in the messy area of design thinking can create. It can be hard, and you do need to talk about the elephants in the room. You do need to make sure, that you're speaking from a place of authenticity when you're in that room and working with people to come up with something that's new and break barriers. So embrace the pain.
So, and as well as, we're not expecting you guys to leave from like these 7 days and you're pro designers, you can be able to do this every single day. You're going to change your whole team's life with, design thinking. But there are always opportunities to, just bring elements of design thinking into your everyday work or sneak into it like this owl is, just kind of tiptoe and say, when your team's discussing a new project or someone's coming in with a new intake, ask questions like, are you sure that that's your problem? Or have you talked to your users and what is the problem that they face versus what you believe the problem is? Even asking your team, are we willing to, break some organizational rules for whoever's seen Marlisa's talk? And question like, what's the, we always say, what's the risk of doing something? And I always like to say, well, what's the risk if we don't do anything at all? Mm-hmm. We can always stay in that status quo. It's easy, but, we need to make sure that we're saying like, it is worth it to try something new. We do want to adapt. We do want to change. We do want the healthcare system to be better. We want the user experience to be better. So then, like Aaron said, it's like, work through that pain. Yeah, there's some risk, but it is worth it to truly change. So it's probably no surprise to you guys. We built everything that you've experienced using design thinking and using user experience from our first, like our beta test and our first prototype to kind of build what we have today. So I thought, I'm just going to show them kind of what, my prototype looked like as I was building through this with everybody on the team. And then, yes, that is my terrible pencil-driven or written version of the workbook, as well as the post-it notes that I look at every single day. Yeah, Roxanne, I had to do something and show some of my post-it notes. So in the heart of design thinking, we are always looking to evolve and to change. So for next time, for you guys, for this time, sorry, we're going to send out a survey. But I would really like your guys' feedback. We do incorporate it. We do change based off of what you guys, who are our users, say to us. So when we do send it out, I know there's always a tendency to be like, survey, and then just kind of tick the boxes and go. But we truly take the feedback to heart, and we do use it to kind of adapt the work and what we do, because we are going to do this again.
And on our team, we do employ radical candor, and that extends to you as well. So that means that if you really liked something, you'd like to see more of it, please let us know. And at the same time, our feelings aren't going to be hurt if something just didn't resonate with you, or maybe you thought that we glossed over a topic too quickly or honed in on something that was redundant. We want to know what you authentically think and what you'd like to see more of, so that we can improve it for next time. Our feelings won't be hurt. We promise you can tell us the truth.
Yeah. And if you do have questions, or you want to reach out to us and even maybe chat about the process and what we've developed, give me a shout. Send me an email, a Twitter DM. I'm always willing to talk about this stuff. I love doing it, which is why we are going to do it again, and we're going to do it again in less than 5 months. So this is the postcard that we're going to send out to all of you guys, April 9th. So we're switching it from a Wednesday to a Thursday, because a lot of teams actually got a hold of us and said they hold team meetings and things on Wednesdays, so they weren't able to do it. So we're just switching it one day. We're still going to do 7 weeks. We encourage you to send this and share this out to all of your friends, family, people you like. Maybe it's people that you don't like, but share it as much as you can.
Yes.
And there will be a sign up there in the email.
That's right. And we will let you know that because you have joined our event over these last few weeks, you are on our distribution list. So you will get notification of all our future events coming up, and you can unsubscribe in that email if you prefer.
We had a question about, will the new course be a repeat? So it's not going to be identical to what you've experienced over the next 7 weeks. There'll be some similarities. We will be finding some new speakers. You'll see some familiar faces as well.
Yep. We're still talking about design thinking and applying it.
Yeah.
But our structure may change a little bit. And also, if you have some suggestions for speakers that you'd like to hear from, please let us know about that as well.
So some final key takeaways that I wanted to leave you guys with today. Design every day. And I'm not saying you go do all of your big projects using design. Just ask those questions with, those small little chunks, and start to shift. If anyone knows, my love of nudge theory, you're not going to be able to say, hey, team, we should do design thinking. They're all going to switch. But if you get them to say like, oh, let's just talk to our users, that's really great. Challenging yourself, your team, your organizational rules, just challenge it and make sure you're always asking questions. And the biggest one, the one we want to really leave with you guys today, if the only thing you take away for the last 7 weeks is this piece, is talk to the humans who have the problem. Talk to your users. Hear their experience. It's impactful. It's going to create change. It's going to take those momentums or moments and shift into momentum. Sorry, too many M's. But it's how you're going to create massive change. And the work that you guys are going to do is going to be richer and better, and it's going to have that better experience for your user. Erin, is there any final words, a piece of wisdom you want to impart?
Just hopefully we've managed to spark you, to inspire you to take those risks and to jump headfirst into something that may be a little bit uncomfortable, but we promise is absolutely rewarding. And we hope that design thinking will bring the change about and the innovations that you're looking for to improve healthcare and to improve your world.
So thank you guys. Like we said, always reach out to us. We are never afraid of an email or a virtual coffee or
We
maybe
love
an
to hear from
in-person one.
you.
We love to hear from
Absolutely love it.
everybody.
Mhm.
You know, big thank you to all of our speakers. You know,
Yes.
we had a fantastic time. And I got this question as a couple DMs in my inbox the other day: is my bow tie real? It is. No
Also-
clip-ons for this guy.
Also, thank you to Allie and to Shay, who were instrumental in making sure that we look good, sound good, and do good. And to our fearless leader, Marlies, who made us do this in the first place. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Hope to hear from you.